James sat on the cozy couch, feeling a rare sense of peace on this quiet weekend afternoon. His hands cradled a warm mug of coffee, his eyes relaxed as he watched the flickering images on the TV. The weight of his usual work stress had melted away for a moment. James was a dedicated man, always putting others first, and today he was grateful for this brief escape. Beside him, his wife Marta leaned back, her head resting against his shoulder. For a brief moment, everything felt perfect. But neither James nor Marta knew that this peaceful afternoon would be their last moment of normalcy for a long time. Hi there, I'm Goldie, and welcome to Goldie's Love Stories. They were at James's sister's house, enjoying a quiet day together. Jane, his sister, and her husband, Victor, had always been a welcoming pair, and their home had a warmth that felt like a second family to James and Marta. Jane and Victor had 3 kids, each full of energy and laughter, and their house always seemed to be filled with the sounds of playful chaos. James had always adored his nieces and nephews. The way they looked up to him, the simple joy in their faces when he made them laugh, it made him feel like an important part of something bigger than himself. Today, the kids were outside, running around the backyard, their laughter echoing through the windows. James couldn't help but smile as he thought about how lucky he was to have such a close-knit family. Marta smiled at James, catching the look of affection he gave the kids. She had never been one for big family gatherings, but over time, she'd grown used to the chaos that came with being around Jane's family. Her heart warmed as she watched the kids interact with James. They were so full of life, so innocent. It was a happiness she'd almost forgotten could exist in her own life. But that blissful happiness did not last very long. A few days later, James received a phone call. The voice on the other end was calm but urgent, and as the words sunk in, his heart began to race. "We regret to inform you that there has been an explosion at your sister Jane's house. A gas leak. Your sister Jane and her husband Victor were inside at the time. Unfortunately, neither of them survived the explosion." James felt the world tilt beneath him. His legs wavered as the shock of the words hit him like a blow. He struggled to breathe, but the panic in his chest made it hard to focus. "Wait, what about the kids?" James's voice cracked, the thought of them, Jane and Victor's children, rushing to the forefront of his mind. Are they okay?" There was a pause on the other end, then the officer's voice came back, more comforting, though still grave. "We've confirmed the children weren't at home at the time of the explosion. They were likely at school. The fire department is currently handling the scene." James's breath came out in short, painful bursts as he sank to the floor, the phone trembling in his hand. The voice continued, but it was as if the words were being spoken from a distance, muffled by the chaos in his head. James had to go to their house. When he arrived, the chaos of flashing sirens and frantic voices overwhelmed him. He barely processed the officer's condolences. All he could think about was the children. His mind raced as he hurried inside, his heart aching with every step. It felt surreal, the house eerily quiet for the first time. He could almost hear the sounds of laughter and games, but they were just memories now. James went to the school to pick up the kids. Their faces were full of excitement, unaware of the nightmare that awaited them. They ran up to him, their backpacks bouncing as they chattered away, oblivious to the tragic reality. Their bright eyes, full of life, contrasted with the hollow, painful truth that had just been thrust upon them. It was a moment that would stay with James forever. He had to break the news. His voice wavered as he told them that their parents were gone. The kids didn't understand, their confusion and fear filling the air as they cried for their mom and dad. The days that followed were a blur. James worked to make sense of everything, organizing the funeral, handling the legalities. But beneath the surface, a deep sadness simmered in him, a loss that felt impossible to describe. He didn't just lose his sister and her husband. He lost the future they had promised, the family bond that had always been a part of his life. In the quiet moments, when James would lie awake, he thought about how different everything was now. His life, once so predictable, had been turned upside down. But there was no turning back. The children needed him, and he was their only remaining family. He couldn't leave them. He couldn't let them go through life without someone to guide them. The weight of it all was unbearable, but James carried on, one day at a time. Marta was supportive at first, but it all changed slowly. She had never signed up for this. Raising children wasn't part of the life she'd envisioned when she married James. It was one thing to be the fun and on holidays, but this was a different reality entirely. Every day, the house felt louder, more chaotic, and her patience seemed to drain by the minute. The kids, understandably, were grieving, acting out in ways that only added to the tension. Daniel, the oldest, struggled to understand why his parents weren't coming back. Sophia, the middle child, was quieter, retreating into herself more and more each day. Luca, the youngest, simply didn't understand what was happening. He just knew his world had been torn apart. It was one thing to visit Jane and Victor's house on weekends, to be a friendly aunt and uncle. It was another to live in their home, surrounded by reminders of their absence, to raise children who weren't hers and who had just lost their parents. The house felt too big, too empty, without Jane and Victor's voices echoing through it. Every morning, Marta found herself dreading the sound of children's footsteps, the constant tug at her patience as she tried to help them with homework or prepare meals. The house, once filled with the warmth of her and James's life together, now seemed cold and foreign. She tried her best, but the overwhelming sense of loss and confusion made everything feel like a burden. James, on the other hand, threw himself into the routine. He focused on creating stability for the kids, trying to provide some semblance of normalcy. He was the emotional rock they needed, even though his own heart was heavy with sorrow. He helped Daniel with his homework, fed Sophia her favorite cereal every morning, and sat with Luca as he built his block towers. In many ways, the children became his lifeline, his reason to get out of bed every day. But as the days turned into weeks, the cracks in Marta's resolve began to show. It started with the small things. Her irritation when one of the kids made too much noise, her sighs when she had to step in to help with their needs. It wasn't that she didn't love them, it was just that she didn't know how to love them the way James did. She had tried, really tried, to adjust to this new life. She even found herself caring for the kids in the moments when James had to work, doing her best to provide comfort. But the more she did, the more she felt the weight of responsibility bearing down on her. The constant demands of motherhood, the never-ending messes, and the feeling of being stretched thin emotionally were things she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't her fault, she knew that, but it didn't make it any easier. James noticed her struggle. He could see it in the way her smile didn't reach her eyes anymore, in the way she pulled away when the kids needed her. He knew Marta wasn't the type to shy away from challenges, but this was different. And he couldn't blame her. Raising someone else's children, especially after such a traumatic loss, was an impossible task for anyone. One evening, after dinner, as they were all sitting in the living room, James, Marta, and the 3 kids, Marta stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. "I can't do this, James," she said, her voice shaking. James looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" Marta bit her lip, looking around at the children. Daniel, who had been quiet for a while, looked up at her with those wide, innocent eyes. Sophia clutched her book tightly, unaware of the tension building in the room, and Luca, with his mischievous grin, was still playing with his blocks. "I love them," Marta continued, her voice trembling. "But it's too much for me. I can't raise them. I don't know how to do this. And it's not just about the kids, James. It's about everything. It's about us, about our life. I feel like I'm losing myself." James's heart sank. He knew this day was coming, but hearing Marta say the words aloud still hurt. He looked at her, trying to process what she was saying, but it was like a knife to his chest. "I didn't sign up for this, James," she said, her voice softening. "I thought I could help, but I feel like I'm drowning. I don't know how to cope with this kind of life, not without losing who I am." For a long moment, James just stared at her. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. He had always believed that they were a team, that they could face anything together. But the truth was, Marta wasn't the same woman she had been before. And he couldn't blame her for wanting to walk away, even though it broke his heart. "I understand," he finally whispered. With those words, Marta left. She didn't say goodbye to the kids, didn't explain herself to them. She just packed her things and disappeared. James watched her go, his heart torn between the woman he loved and the responsibility he now had to shoulder alone. As Marta's absence settled in, the house grew quieter. The kids clung to James, needing him more than ever, and he gave them everything he had. Despite the heartbreak and the challenges, he wasn't about to let them go through this alone. And so, James continued, heartbroken but determined, raising his nieces and nephew with the same love he would have given his own children. The road ahead was difficult, but he wouldn't give up. For them, he would keep going. James knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to give his sister's children the life they deserved. Despite the emotional turmoil of losing Jane and Victor and the deep pain from Marta's departure, he threw himself into the task of being a father figure to Daniel, Sophia, and Luca. The house, once a place of chaos and laughter, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where they could all heal together. Every morning, James woke up early to get the kids ready for school. He packed their lunches, made their favorite breakfast, and made sure they had everything they needed. After they left for school, he'd go over the bills, manage the household finances, and try to make the most of his work hours. His job had become a lifeline, a distraction from the overwhelming emotional weight that often threatened to consume him. Financially, it wasn't easy. James had always been a reliable worker, but suddenly finding himself as the sole provider for 3 children, on top of maintaining his own mental health, was a huge strain. He cut back on every expense he could. The savings he had slowly began to dwindle as he worked to maintain the household and pay for necessities. Despite the struggle, he knew he had to keep going. The kids needed him, and that was all that mattered. The emotional toll was just as heavy. James couldn't remember the last time he'd had a moment for himself. Each day bled into the next, with no time for relaxation or self-care. He felt the weight of guilt every time he didn't have the energy to engage with the kids as fully as he wanted to. But in the quiet moments when he looked at their faces, especially Daniel's adventurous grin, Sophia's deep love of books, and Luca's mischievous laugh, he remembered why he was doing this. For them, it wasn't just the day-to-day routines that weighed on him. It was the emotional burden. He had become the emotional anchor for 3 grieving children who were trying to make sense of their new reality. It wasn't easy, but as the months passed, something incredible began to happen. They started to heal. Daniel, who had once been distant, now shared his hopes and dreams with James. Sophia began to show an enthusiasm for learning, often reciting princess stories with the hope of one day being as brave as her favorite heroines. And Luca, his mischievous smile never faltered, even in the hardest moments, began building new towers, not just of blocks but of hope, one piece at a time. James didn't realize it at the time, but his determination to document their lives, partially as a way of holding himself accountable and partially to have something to look back on when the hard times passed, would change everything. He started a simple YouTube vlog sharing their journey. At first, it was just for himself, a place where he could vent, reflect, and track the progress of his new family. But soon he realized the healing wasn't just for him and the kids, it was for others too. James began sharing their milestones on social media, small moments like Daniel's first soccer goal, Sophia's excitement when she finished reading her first chapter book, and Luca's proud display of his new block tower. But it wasn't just the kids' accomplishments that connected with people. It was the raw, unfiltered honesty James shared about the struggles. His daily battles with grief, his financial worries, and his efforts to keep it all together were open for the world to see. The response was overwhelming. Strangers from across the globe reached out, offering words of support, advice, and empathy. They shared their own stories of loss, struggle, and triumph. What had started as a small vlog turned into a massive following. Every post seemed to resonate with more and more people, especially those who had gone through similar experiences. As the weeks turned into months, the community James built online became an unexpected source of strength. Every like, every comment, every message of encouragement was like a lifeline that helped him stay afloat. He didn't know it at the time, but this was a turning point, not just for the kids, but for him too. He wasn't alone in his struggles. Others understood. And in that understanding, there was healing. Then one day, while scrolling through her feed, Marta came across one of the videos James had posted. It was a short clip of Daniel, with a wide grin on his face, running through the backyard with a soccer ball, shouting about his latest goal. Marta stopped, her heart aching as she watched. She had almost forgotten what it looked like to see Daniel so carefree, so full of joy. She watched as James appeared in the background, cheering him on, his face beaming with pride. For the first time in months, Marta felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: regret. The kids had grown so much. They weren't the scared, fragile children she had left behind. They had found stability, they had found love, and it was all because of James. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she typed out a message to him, a mixture of guilt, hope, and longing swirling inside her. James, I've been watching your videos. I had no idea how much the kids had changed, how much you'd done for them. I'm sorry for everything. I made a mistake.
Can we talk?
She sent the message, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time in months, she realized just how much she missed them, how much she missed him. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but the hope that she could somehow make things right flooded her thoughts. But would it be enough? Would James forgive her for leaving when they needed her most?
She had to know.
When James received Marta's message, it felt like a bittersweet moment in a life that had been nothing but difficult since the tragedy. He had spent months trying to hold his family together, trying to be both a father and an uncle, battling the weight of loss, financial struggles, and the emotional burden of it all. And yet, when Marta asked for reconciliation, part of him couldn't help but feel relief. When they met in person for the first time after her departure, James could hardly contain his joy. The sight of her, Marta, his wife, was like a glimpse of the past he'd once taken for granted. He had spent so much time missing her, questioning himself, wondering if he had done something wrong to cause her to leave. But now she was back, and for a moment, he allowed himself to believe that perhaps they could rebuild what they had lost. The reunion was awkward at first, filled with polite smiles and hesitant conversation. Marta apologized for leaving so suddenly, and though the apology was sincere, there was a distance in her voice that James couldn't quite place. Still, he embraced the idea of starting over. After all, this wasn't just about them, it was about the kids too. James wanted them to have a sense of normalcy again, to feel like the family they had once been. But as the days passed, James began to notice subtle shifts in Marta's behavior. At first, it was just a few offhand comments. She would ask him about his online earnings, how much money he was making from the viral content. "How much are you bringing in now, James?" she'd ask casually with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. "It must be a lot, right?" She wasn't the type to talk about money before, and the sudden focus on his finances raised a red flag in his mind. She seemed fascinated by the idea of making money online, and James couldn't understand why it was so important to her now. It wasn't the Marta he had known. The conversations quickly turned into interrogations. How many views were his videos getting? How much was he making per video? How much were they bringing in per month? James found himself growing uncomfortable with the constant questioning, but He brushed it off, hoping it was just a phase. After all, it had been a while since they'd spent time together. Maybe she was just curious. But as the days turned into weeks, the tension in the house began to build. Marta's behavior became more unsettling. She would show up at random times, but instead of engaging with the kids, she'd retreat into her own space, often sitting in silence for hours. The kids, especially Daniel, began to notice the change. Marta, who had once been so warm and caring, started treating them with impatience. One afternoon, Daniel came running into the living room, his face flushed with excitement. "Marta, look," he exclaimed, holding up a drawing he had made of their family. "I did it for you. It's us. Together." Marta barely looked up from her phone. "That's nice, Daniel. Go put it on the fridge," she said curtly, barely giving him a second glance. The coldness in her tone shocked James. Daniel looked hurt, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he quietly walked away, his excitement deflated. James felt a lump form in his throat. Marta seemed indifferent, detached. And this wasn't just a one-time occurrence. The more Marta interacted with the kids, the more distant she became. She started snapping at Daniel when he asked questions, ignoring Sophia when she tried to talk to her, and brushing off Luca when he sought her attention. James noticed Marta becoming more focused on her own needs and desires. She would spend hours on her phone, scrolling through social media, obsessing over her appearance, and checking her bank account balance. The change was palpable. The once warm, welcoming atmosphere of their home had become tense, filled with an undercurrent of frustration that seemed to come from Marta's own discontent. One night, as James sat in the kitchen, watching the kids eat their dinner, he suddenly realized the truth. Marta had come back, not because she wanted to rebuild their family, not because she missed him or the kids, but because she saw an opportunity. The viral videos, the growing following, the money, it had all become too tempting for her to resist. She hadn't returned to rekindle their relationship or to be a mother to the children. She had returned for the fame and the fortune, hoping to capitalize on the success James had built. It hit him like a punch to the gut. The final straw came a few days later when Marta had a confrontation with Daniel. He had been trying to talk to her about something trivial, but Marta's patience had worn thin. "I'm trying to get some work done, Daniel." "Stop bothering me," she snapped, her voice sharp. Daniel recoiled, his face falling as he shrank away. James felt a wave of anger rise within him. This wasn't the woman he had married. This wasn't the person who had once been so loving and nurturing. That night, James couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of his realization pressing down on him. He had tried to make this work, to believe in Marta, to believe that she truly wanted to be a part of their lives again. But now he saw the truth. Marta hadn't come back for the family. She had come back for herself, for the attention, for the money. And in the process, she was damaging everything James had worked so hard to build. The next morning, James sat Marta down. He told her in no uncertain terms that he couldn't do this anymore. He couldn't allow her to use him and the kids for her own gain. "Maybe I was wrong to believe that things could go back to the way they were," he said quietly. "But this isn't working. You're not here for us, Marta. You're here for yourself." Tears welled up in Marta's eyes, but James was resolute. He knew what he had to do. And with that, he ended their relationship, choosing to protect his children and himself from the toxicity Marta had brought back into their lives. In the months that followed, James focused on what mattered most, his nieces and nephews. He gave them the love, stability, and support they needed, and they flourished under his care. They continued to grow, learn, and thrive as a family, with James at the center, strong, loving, and unwavering. The viral videos kept coming, but now they were a testament to the resilience of the family James had built with love and devotion. In the end, James found peace. He had let go of the past, and with his children by his side, he was ready for whatever the future held. Thanks for watching. How would you rate this story? Give it 1 to 5 hearts in the comments and let me know what you thought. This is a brand new channel, and your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed the story, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you never miss an episode. Your likes, comments, and shares help this community grow, and I'd be so grateful to have you along for the journey.
See you next time.